A yellow ribbon moment grows increasingly tattered. It is June 3rd, Tuesday, and this is Now.
We don't leave our men or women in uniform behind.
Serious questions are being raised about the capture and release of Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl.
Why did the White House do it? Does this prisoner exchange,
in contravention of U.S. law,
represent a shift in a long-standing policy?
You do not negotiate with terrorists.
Would you have brought him home if you had this choice?
Not under these circumstances.
You would not?
A major shift in tone by the administration over the last 48 hours.
Yesterday, the talking point was Sergeant Bergdahl served with honor and distinction. That's gone.
NBC has learned the Army is gearing up for an inquiry.
Polls in Congress are growing louder to investigate.
If he did do wrong, action should be taken.
The idea that you shouldn't have gotten him out because he might have been a bad guy is nonsense.
This principle
We bring them home.
of leave no man or woman behind is one that I stand by.
Regardless of the circumstances, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop.
Days after the decision to swap 5 former Taliban commanders for America's only prisoner of war, the questions and the controversy are growing. Today, NBC News has learned the Army is preparing to launch a full high-level inquiry into the conduct and circumstances surrounding the capture of Sergeant Bo Bergdahl to determine if possible criminal charges may be warranted. An earlier inquiry determined that Bergdahl walked away from his base without his weapon or his body armor, leading to search operations in which 6 soldiers died. On his Facebook page, Joint Chiefs Chairman Martin Dempsey wrote, "Our Army's leaders will not look away from misconduct if it occurred." The multifaceted controversy has chased President Obama overseas. The president was barely wheels down in Poland before he had to answer questions relating to Bergdahl's conduct.
Regardless of the circumstances, whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop. We don't condition that.
The White House is increasingly under fire from Republicans who say the president broke the law by not notifying Congress 30 days before the transfer. Critics also say the release of those Taliban detainees reportedly seen here arriving in Qatar will be met with American bloodshed. And by critics, that is to say, Arizona Senator John McCain.
But what is the price we may pay or likely pay in the future in American blood in return for releasing these 5 hardest of hardcore jihadists who are not only Taliban but also al-Qaeda?
In Warsaw, the president pushed back, saying he is confident in Qatar's ability to monitor the released prisoners and also claiming the historical high ground.
This is what happens at the end of wars. That was true for George Washington. That was true for Abraham Lincoln. That was true for FDR. That's been true of every combat situation, that at some point you make sure that you try to get your folks back. And that's the right thing to do.
Joining me now from Warsaw, Poland, is NBC News political director and chief White House correspondent Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks for joining me. I know we're on a short delay, so I will get started. This White House seems to have found itself in a much thornier situation than I think it seems like they anticipated. And I wonder if you have any news on this latest breaking information we have that Senator Dianne Feinstein received a call from National Security Advisor Tony Blinken apologizing for not having given her and Congress more warning in advance of the release of these 5 detainees.
So now we're hearing from Feinstein. Right, I've seen these reports. Dennis McDonough actually has been on Capitol Hill today, also doing sort of some post-operation, post-announcement political damage control, if you want to call it, with all of these members of Congress, including folks that they need to be defending them in particular. So we don't yet have the confirmation of whether it was a Blinken phone call. We know that there was the bottom line is we do know the White House is playing a little a post-mortem here, trying to stop the political bleeding that's taken place on the Hill, because there is a full-fledged sort of there's some folks are very angry with the administration, some are perplexed. Nobody seems to be excited. And I tell you this, the White House anticipated backlash over the 5 Taliban members that they picked. They anticipated backlash at any of this of taking people from Gitmo that were deemed to be so dangerous that they had to be at Gitmo for over 10 years, that choosing to release them in some form or another would have gotten criticism. What they did not expect was the blowback on Bergdahl himself, and that's why they seem to be caught a little flat-footed, Alex.
Well, and in fact, it seems like the calculus was it's going to be hard for conservatives and Republicans and the GOP to criticize the release of an American POW. That calculus seems to have shifted remarkably given the narrative that is emerging around Bergdahl's desertion, I guess, of his Army post. But the White House must have known. I mean, this was something that was in the press years ago, that this was part of his story. Do you get the sense that they just didn't, that the release would have neutralized that?
Well, they thought that there'd be a little rallying around the soldier. They assumed that there would be some soldiers that served with him that would stand up for him. They have been surprised that there is really nobody that is standing up for him in a notable way that served with him. That is something that has them scratching their heads a little bit. But you know, they're trying to push back now. I've received some emails. They're circulating an op-ed, for instance, that Kelly Ayotte, the New Hampshire Republican senator, wrote over Memorial Day weekend, saying, keep Sergeant Bergdahl in your thoughts and prayers, and I reiterate that I hope the Defense Department is doing everything they can to get them back. Now, of course, she's critical of the deal, but she's critical of the Taliban part of this. So they're trying to push back a little bit on the political incoming that they're getting. But, you know, you look at, the deal itself. I mean, you had Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, raising doubts about whether calling this a one-sided deal. So this criticism isn't just coming from Republicans. There is sort of a lot of folks in the national security community, both on the left and the right, scratching their heads on the deal a little bit, but also on sort of how the White House has handled the communication of this deal.
NBC's Chuck Todd, thank you as always, Chuck, and safe travels. You can, of course, catch Chuck every weekday morning on the Daily Rundown at 9 a.m. Eastern. Joining me now is MSNBC counterterror analyst and former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Michael Leiter, and Washington Post columnist and senior fellow of governance studies at the Brookings Institute, E.J. Dionne. E.J., how do you grade the administration's handling of this effort?
C, I think, at best. I mean, I think that they might have better anticipated that there would be some reaction given all the stories out there about Sergeant Bergdahl's past. And I don't quite understand yet why they didn't give anybody in Congress a heads up. On the other hand, I think I might then turn around and give them some compensatory points, because I got to say I was very surprised that there wasn't simply a response, vis-a-vis that Kelly Ayotte piece you just mentioned, that, hey, one of our guys has been in captivity for 5 years. No matter what turns out to be the case, 5 years in captivity for an American is a long time, and shouldn't we celebrate the fact that he has been released? And I think that's the biggest surprise to everybody, despite the reports on what he may or may not have done.
Yeah, if there was some favor dispensed, it was short-lived. Michael, from a counterterrorism perspective, we have talked a lot about Bo Bergdahl. We have not talked a lot about the Taliban, the released Taliban officials who are now in Qatar. John Boehner has cast doubt on whether they are truly going to be monitored. There is some, Senator McCain has talked about whether or not they will truly be able to be, they'll be able to travel freely, and how much of a threat they pose to our to American society, and how much of a counterterrorism or terrorism threat they pose. From your vantage point, how worried should we be? How worried should the global community be?
I think the global community in the U.S. should be worried. I mean, there are people in Guantanamo who were basic foot soldiers. That's not the category these guys were in. These were really key Taliban leaders who played a huge role in their defense ministry, who worked with al-Qaeda on some intelligence issues. These are senior folks who could play a big role. I'll even give the Qataris the benefit of the doubt for the next year. I think they're likely to control them to a great degree, but it's only a one-year agreement, and maybe the reasoning is most of our troops will be out 1 year from now. But I will be really, really surprised if 1 year plus, these 5 are not deeply involved with the Taliban in Afghanistan, and frankly will make it more difficult for the government we currently support in Afghanistan to have control over the region.
Well, and of course, yes. So to that point, I mean, and the Washington Post editorial board makes this point more eloquently. But they basically said the president has made clear to the Afghans that he's effectively giving up on them by allowing these high-level Taliban officials to effectively come back to that part of the world and operate in some capacity.
That's right. And again, it's not about these guys becoming suicide bombers. I mean, that's the sort of recidivism problem that we've had with most of our Guantanamo people who have been released. These guys are certainly going to be looked up to by the rest of the Taliban leadership. Mullah Omar's reaction was pretty telling. These are meaningful leaders, and I think we are fundamentally giving this to the government of Afghanistan, saying, we're very sorry, we're leaving, you're going to have to face lots of problems, and one of the other things you're going to have to face is what these 5 mean to the Taliban.
EJ, there's a lot to unpack in this story, but another angle on it is the signing statements and executive privilege and the fact that the president in 2007 said, I will not use signing statements to nullify or undermine congressional instructions as enacted into law. President Obama, in all fairness, has signed far fewer than George Bush, who signed 1,200 signing statements, amendments to laws, basically. President Obama has signed only 30. But at the same time, you know, it once again brings us to this conversation about the difference between candidate Obama and President Obama, and the old notion that you are where you stand, where you sit, that experience is everything, that vantage point is everything. How much of an issue do you think this is for his legacy as president?
Well, look, it's so easy to play footage of very strong statements by then Senator Obama on what he saw as President Bush's abuse of signing statements. They've been out there already. And so that's a problem. I think that the issue here is when you are president and you see an opportunity to get a POW released, the only POW left from these wars, you are inclined to grab that opportunity. And as we said earlier, I think to make the assumption that people will be so glad to get the POW out that Congress will understand. But still, again, as we've already talked about, there's always controversy over releasing people from Guantanamo. I think 2 things here. One is, I think Tony Blinken did say something very important, which is, let's at least give Sergeant Bergdahl a chance to tell his side of the story. And in particular, did he have all his faculties about him, if indeed, as seems the case, that he abandoned his post. The second thing is, you wonder if this negotiation, or whatever the administration wants to call it, was part of an effort to open broader discussions with the Taliban, to see if there can be some longer-term settlement of the conflict, and that we will find out soon enough.
Michael, let me ask you on that note, to EJ's point, I think a lot of folks keep trying to read a bigger project to be at the root of this, not just about winding down a war and getting a POW out of a country, not just about sort of a transfer and a prisoner swap, but that this is somehow a bellwether, a precursor to broader action, broader negotiations with the Taliban, or a broader movement to close Guantanamo Bay. Do you see it as such at this point?
Well, I see it as a broader effort on the president's part to close Guantanamo, a very forceful statement of, we are going to get these people out of here. I don't see it as a broader statement on trying to open up deeper negotiations with the Taliban. In fact, that's the piece, that demand is what largely, not entirely, but largely scuttled previous discussions to get Bergdahl back in 2011, 2012. So I think it's just the opposite, actually. It's trying to get this individual back, giving that up, and not looking for anything deeper, because we are withdrawing from Afghanistan in a significant way. And I have great sympathy for the president as commander-in-chief doing all he can to get him back, not looking at the circumstances. I think there's plenty of time to investigate that. But on the front of what was exchanged, we can't kid ourselves, and I think the president recognized this. These 5 individuals absolutely will pose a threat to Afghan stability in the future.
EJ, you know, one thing about the Republican critics who have been fierce and uncensored in their thoughts in the last couple days. If the president had left Bo Bergdahl in Afghanistan, one can imagine the same sort of counter argument coming from the right. In other words, he was in some ways caught between a rock and a hard place. Get Bo Bergdahl out and, oh, this guy was not a prisoner of war. He was a traitor to his country. Leave Bo Bergdahl there and you've left a patriot in enemy hands.
Well, I think the assumption behind your question, which is that these days the Republicans will criticize President Obama for whatever he does, is entirely true. And that is why I think some of us were taken aback at the ferocity of the immediate reaction that they had. I think that what you're seeing on the question of consultation of Congress, did he follow the law, that seems to have a broader impact on both parties, where people are basically asking, senators of both parties are basically asking, was there some way they could have kept us in the loop, at least to some degree, about what they were up to? And I think that's why the president's chief of staff is on the Hill, is to try to work that out, because Dianne Feinstein being critical, Dianne Feinstein doesn't usually jump to criticize President Obama.
And this is certainly an issue where the White House would enjoy the support of Senator Dianne Feinstein. Michael Leiter and EJ Dionne, thank you both, gentlemen, for your time and thoughts.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.